Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Breaking now on Morning News Now. Millions are on alert this morning as Ida barrels its way through the South after making landfall as a powerful Category 4 hurricane. The entire city of New Orleans is without power. More than 1 million people don't have electricity this morning. Damage there is described as catastrophic. And a levee in a town nearby has failed, threatening hundreds of people who did not evacuate. This powerful storm made landfall on the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a day people on the Gulf Coast already have etched in their minds. Ida came on land near Port Fourchon, Louisiana, south of New Orleans. The damage there is already extensive, and as the morning goes on, we'll get a better idea of the damage Ida left behind. But in places like Houma, Louisiana, the damage is already catastrophic. Take a look.
Oh, that roof is coming.
And take a look at this. One hospital lost its roof during this storm. We can't forget all of this is happening in the middle of a pandemic. Hospitals across the South are already overwhelmed with COVID patients. With the power out in the New Orleans area, some hospitals are now relying on generators. Doctors and nurses are now hoping the storm does not bring in a wave of new patients and new COVID cases. As the storm heads north, we have a team covering the damage, the current conditions, and what we can expect in the coming days. Mississippi's Gulf Coast avoided a direct hit from Ida, but still felt the impact of this powerful storm. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster is in Gulfport, Mississippi, with a look at conditions there.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. You know, this wind and rain that you're seeing and that I'm feeling right now, this is something that we've been experiencing for hours now here in Gulfport, which, as a reminder, was not the center point of the storm, was not in the main storm trajectory. Here in Gulfport, there was that tropical storm warning throughout the night, and that's what we're still dealing with now. But Hurricane Ida, now Tropical Storm Ida, just to show you what that tropical storm can do, this is what those winds can lead to. So don't take that tropical storm downgrade too seriously, because that still means tree limbs can fall. That still means this heavy rain and heavy wind gusts. Last night, a wind gust of up to 74 miles an hour here in Gulfport, pieces of roofs flying off. That is the danger that you have, and that is why officials here in Gulfport have had that curfew in effect since 8 a.m. yesterday, begging and pleading with people to stay off the roads because conditions can change so quickly. And that's something that we've experienced here, where even yesterday at one point there was a break of sunshine that you saw, and then next thing you know, 20 minutes later, you have rain going essentially horizontally. Now, one thing that we're not dealing with here, fortunately, are those power outages. While you heard of the million power outages in places, or millions of people without power in places like Louisiana, here in Gulfport, it's about 93,000 in the state of Mississippi. You see right now we have power. While power did go out a little bit last night for a period of time, it came back, and you see pretty much even in the distance that power is still up. So that is the concern that you have here, that people are going to become complacent. And as the mayor told me yesterday, complacency kills. They're asking people to still stay inside because in addition to the wind and rain, there's the threat of storm surges, the river flooding, and that tornado warning and watches that continues to pop up as we watch and as we go through the morning hours. So, Joe, Savannah, that's the situation here in Gulfport. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Shaq, thank you. Stay safe.
Let's head right to New Orleans. NBC's Jay Gray is there. Jay, if you can hear us, good to see you.
Jay, good morning. Okay,
Joe,
looks
good to talk to you as well, and good to get a break from the elements here.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there. We know the city's in the dark this morning. Any word on how long people might be without power?
Yeah, Savannah, I think it's going to be a while. Look, there are 1 million plus people just in the New Orleans metro area without power. And the reason why is the transmission lines that bring that power into the city. 8 of them are in the Mississippi River. Extracting those and repairing them is going to take some time. While we do have a break from the wind that was very severe here and the rain that fell straight for 16 or so hours, I want to give you a look at what we have behind us here. And it's a portion of a rooftop that was thrown into the French Quarter. And what you can see is that as it was pushed into the French Quarter. It pulled down an overhead street sign here. The arm that held that up mangled and twisted, pulled to the ground. As you work up and to the balcony, what you'll see is some shutters that were pulled away from doorways, the doors forced open by the severe wind that whipped through this area, and that's across the French Quarter. This is not extraordinary thing. You see this across the French Quarter, along with broken glass. You hear alarms across most every block in the French Quarter. Where did the roof come from? It came from this building just across Decatur Street here. That is the Jack's Brewery building. Inside, you've got shops, restaurants, businesses. It's a tourist attraction here, a popular one. And this big piece of the roof that you see behind us, guys, that's just one section that's gone, but throughout the French Quarter, you find other sections of this roof. So it's a mess inside there, I'm sure, as well. And we'll find out more when the sun comes up here.
All right, Jay, great. Jay, thanks so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. So near New Orleans is Baton Rouge, which was spared from a direct hit. Ida's slow movement after landfall meant hours, though, of wind and rain for Louisiana's capital. With the storm moving north, we're now getting a look at what it did there. For more on that, we are joined by Kurt Monte. He's Chief of Public Information for the Baton Rouge Fire Department. Kurt, good morning to you. We've been hearing about some dire stories in such places like LaPlace, south of you, where thousands are in need of rescue. What's the situation for you guys? I know the wind wasn't quite as bad. You got hit around 10 o'clock last night, but what's the latest on how the situation is in Baton Rouge?
Yes, fortunately, we didn't get the direct impact that was first thought that we would, but we do have, we do have power issues. We have several trees down. Through the night, our rescue teams were out and they ran 123 calls or responses and rescued 10 people, most of those from homes or where trees have fallen over on top of the home. They were able to extricate several families from their homes and get them to better shelters. So we're still assessing the situation. We don't have any cell service here from what I can tell this morning. And, that we're not out of the woods per se yet. And then when daylight comes and the message is for people just to stay put because it's so dangerous with the power lines being down, and we still don't know what structural damage we have. We're just getting into a daybreak here, so we'll be able to assess the situation a lot more then.
We understand the city spent about $20 million to improve the drainage system before this storm. Do you know how it's holding up right now?
Yeah, I mean, drainage-wise, obviously flooding is an issue that we've dealt with many times here in Baton Rouge, unfortunately. But we didn't get the rain that was first predicted. But we're still waiting to see what the impact's going to be of the surge. That has a lot to do with how our rivers drain, and it's not really something that the system can help if you have that water being pushed back up and it has nowhere to go. So hopefully the rain will subside. We're still getting a little bit of rain right now. The winds are still blowing, but not near as bad. So again, just wanting to push that message for people to stay put. Don't get out and sightsee. It's very dangerous. We still have first responders responding. Our energy crews will be out trying to restore power as best they can. And it's just best for people to stay put.
There was no evacuation order for Baton Rouge. Most places didn't have one simply because of the time frame and how quickly this thing just accelerated. But knowing that most people stayed in town and hunkered down, does that change how you're going to approach everything this morning?
Yeah, we did open two pre-landfall shelters here in Baton Rouge. One was at our River Center, and another one was at the FG Clark Activity Center, which is on Southern University's campus. Last totals I had seen before last night, we had a couple hundred people that were sheltering with us. But that's it. This with people being here, we're not a city that's evacuated, and we are a large municipality here. So the main thing is for people just to stay home, not get out on the roads, not to try to go out. There's really nothing. The power is out nearly everywhere here in the city. There's lines down everywhere. There's a lot of trees. There's still a lot of debris. Again, we haven't had the daylight to be able to assess the total damages. But the good news so far is we're not reporting any fatalities here in the parish, and hopefully we can keep that statistic where it's at.
It is good news to hear. Kurt Monty with the Baton Rouge Fire Department. We know you've got a busy morning ahead, so thank you for taking some time to join us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And we are keeping a close eye on the path of Ida this morning.
Yeah, and we actually have some new live pictures as the sun rises over New Orleans. This is our first real look at the extent of Ida's destruction. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns has been tracking the storm, and he has the latest for us.
Good morning. Ida has been an incredibly resilient storm. Finally weakened down to a tropical storm early this morning. I mean, the fact that it made landfall as a major Category 4 hurricane, 150-mile-per-hour winds, and it was 9 hours later, it was still a major hurricane. Absolutely incredible. The wind damage is going to, once we see all the effects later on today when we can get the helicopters up to get the pictures of it, it's just incredible the damage that's going to be in southeastern Louisiana. And then, of course, the rainfall problems that we're still dealing with. So let me give you the latest from the Hurricane Center. We're looking at 60-mile-per-hour maximum sustained winds. So the winds have really come down. The winds have significantly weakened with this storm. I do not expect a lot of additional wind damage in Mississippi. Isolated power outages heading up towards Jackson and areas like Meridian. And as far as the forecast goes, the winds will extend northwards, and at the same time, those winds down towards the coast will begin to relax. And that's why we'll be able to get out there and assess the damage and get to see who needs help and kind of get those rescues out there to people that need them, especially for any of those flash flood emergencies. Current wind gusts about 43 in Hattiesburg. So my rule of thumb is usually 40 miles per hour or above as isolated power outages, and that's going to be about the worst of them from here on in. Notice New Orleans, the winds are much lower now, only in the 30-mile-per-hour range. And how about these max winds that we saw? Down along landfall, Port Fourchon, 172-mile-per-hour wind gust on a ship. So that was a little above ground level, but still impressive. Grand Isle, 146. The highest in New Orleans, by the way, was 87. The additional threats today are all about thunderstorms, heavy rain, flash flooding, and the possibility of isolated tornadoes. We could still see those this morning, right through this afternoon, areas of Mississippi, Alabama, even a little sliver there of Florida near Pensacola. And then the forecast tonight and tomorrow takes the storm into areas of Tennessee, possibly looking at the storm will curve down and through Kentucky. Once it hits the mountainous regions of the Appalachians, watch out for that flash flooding threat in the mountains, and then eventually all the way through the Northeast. So what does this all mean? We have 58 million people that still could see flash flooding impacts from this storm over the next couple of days. Of course, the grave concerns are the flash flood warnings down where the storm is now along the Gulf Coast. And here's the additional rainfall totals. Areas of Mississippi getting a ton of rain, and then the storm will push up into areas of the Northeast and the Tennessee Valley. I mean, another huge rain event for areas of New England should cause additional significant flooding, guys. So we're done with just about the wind and the storm surge, but we still have a lot of rain to go with this storm.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Let's now go to NBC News correspondent Ron Allen. He is in Jackson, Mississippi for us this morning. Ron, good morning. So as the sun starts to come up, I can see there where you still are. It looks windy and rainy. Tell us about what you're seeing there this morning.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of rain. This started a few hours ago and has been picking up as the hours have been going on through the morning. Sheets of rain. The wind is picking up as well. There have been gusts reported in the state as much as 50, 60 miles per hour. But again, it comes in bands. We are still north of where the storm center is. It's moving very slowly, as we've heard reported throughout the morning. The peak and the worst of it is supposed to happen here later this afternoon. But I can tell you right now, it's already getting pretty bad. We're hunkered down outside of a hotel that's become something of a refuge. All the cars in this parking lot are people from Louisiana who have come here to seek shelter. It's about a 3-hour drive or so from New Orleans to Jackson on a good day, and people are here with all their possessions and families and pets, and they're just huddled by the TV and on their phones trying to get word of what's going on back home. Here, the concern is about a lot of rain. The area, like so much of the rest of the country, is already saturated, and they're talking about 4 to 6 more inches of rain as the day goes on. Everything is shut down, of course, and Schools are closed, businesses are closed, there's very little traffic on the roadways, and there's a big concern about flooding. There's a lot of areas around the city that flood historically, and that's probably going to happen again. So the word, as we hear in so many places, is for people to stay home, hunker down, let this thing blow through. It's moving very slowly, we know. The hope, of course, is that it picks up speed and gets out of here. But for now, this is where we are at this moment. But in a few hours, it's expected to be even worse than this as the storm moves north.
And Ron, just the fact that you are 3 hours from New Orleans, I guess, really tells us the size of this storm and why it's presenting such a huge problem all along the Gulf Coast, right?
Yes, and we're at the storm is below us. So, you know, when we were flying here from New York, from the East Coast, we were flying in the direction of the storm. The storm's coming at us. We got in safely last night. It wasn't even raining. But overnight, as the storm has moved, I've heard Bill Cairns and others say it's in the single digits miles per hour. It's sort of sitting over these areas and just dumping rain, and it's steady. And I mean, I'm standing here in a fixed position because it just keeps coming in waves and waves and waves. And again, it's easing up a little bit, but this is the beginning of it. And as the storm keeps moving north, the center of the storm is expected to pass right over Jackson late this afternoon, early evening. So, again, you know, this is the beginning of it, and it's going to get much worse, we fear. Guys, back to you.
All right, Ron Allen. Ron, stay safe, reporting from Jackson, Mississippi. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron. Stay safe. Let's now go to Houma, Louisiana, which was hit hard by Ida after it made landfall. That's where we find NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky.
Morgan, let's hear what you got.
Hey, Joe, Savannah, it is going to be a beyond challenging day for tens of thousands of people here in the city of Houma and Terrebonne Parish following Ida. I have heard from multiple people in the last hour that this is the worst hurricane they have ever experienced, and this is a place that knows them all too well. Katrina, Rita, Gustav have all struck and made an impact here, but it has been Ida that has left an incredible trail of damage behind. Those wind gusts upwards of 140 miles an hour have essentially turned nearly every building or block into scenes like you see behind me. Buildings reduced to rubble, collapsed onto the ground, and we know that getting from point A to point B made incredibly difficult by power lines and power poles that are blocking roadways right now. The concern is, how much more does this damage go? How further does it go? Because first responders and people who live here have really had to hunker down for the better part of yesterday once Ida rolled in here. And part of the problem is that one of the eye walls of Ida, where those strong winds are the absolute worst, seemingly stalled over parts of this area. And so there was never a reprieve for hours, just lashing homes and buildings with those winds. They have a power plant here in the city of Houma, rated to a Category 4 hurricane. It had to be evacuated because the roof started to be peeled off by Ida's winds that were so incredibly strong. There is no power, there is no water, and frankly, there is no chance or no idea as to when either one of those things will be returning here in this community. We are about 63 miles southwest of New Orleans, and folks here, they feel cut off because as of right now, they're living in the dark and they don't know how bad Ida was, but they have a very good idea that when the sun comes up today, it's only going to be worse. Joe, Savannah, will send it back to you.
All right, Morgan Chesky from Houma, Louisiana. Stay safe.
We don't yet know the full extent of the damage caused by Ida, but we do know that federal emergency aid is coming to Louisiana.
Yeah, President Biden has approved a disaster declaration for the state. Flooding could persist along the Gulf and the storm's path in the coming days.
NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now from Washington. So, Mike, can you tell us more about this presidential disaster declaration? How is he responding to the hurricane so far?
Well, Joe, just think about all these crises converging at once for this president. Obviously, we're just less than 24 hours now from that deadline in Afghanistan for the withdrawal of U.S. forces. Yesterday, the president traveling to Dover Air Force Base to receive those heroes who died in combat last week. But then you had the president go straight from Dover Air Force Base to FEMA headquarters, where he urged those in the affected areas here in Louisiana to listen closely to the emergency officials and their warnings. Take a listen to some of what the president said yesterday.
To the people of the Gulf Coast, I want you to know that we're praying for the best and planning prepared for the worst. As soon as the storm passes, we're going to put the country's full might behind the rescue and recovery.
This morning, the president will have that Situation Room briefing for the latest on Afghanistan, and then White House officials say he'll have multiple updates throughout the day from his Homeland Security team to get the latest on Ida and its track, which, as you've been detailing this morning, will take it through much of the east coast of the U.S.
Now, Mike, how has FEMA already responded to this catastrophe? What's happening on the ground there in terms of a response?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the lessons from Katrina, which was, of course, 16 years to the day after Ida struck the Louisiana coast, was that the federal emergency response needs to be ahead of the storm, not wait and see what happens. And so, according to a release we got from FEMA yesterday, there are a number of assets that were already in place to aid with the assistance at this point. 3.5 million meals, 2.5 million liters of water, 139 tarps, and significantly, given the loss of power in New Orleans, 185 generators had already been positioned down in Louisiana. But obviously more is going to be needed. And so that disaster declaration that the president signed yesterday will continue to prioritize Louisiana in getting more relief as it identifies its needs in the days ahead.
And Mike, speaking of lessons from Katrina, I'm thinking of the possibility of a presidential visit. Clearly, we know it's very early right now. We don't yet know the full extent of the damage. But have there even been early rumblings of a possible visit by the president to Louisiana or areas hit hard by this?
Yeah, you're right, Joe. It is too early to say. The White House will obviously keep us updated if the president will travel. Of course, the biggest concern at this point is getting in the way. The president would not want any of the security preparations that are necessary ahead of a presidential visit to the area to distract from getting these disaster needs met in the local areas, of the affected areas. But of course, this is a president that will want to see things on the ground if at all possible. And so we should stay tuned for the president's travel schedule to change in the days ahead.
Right. Mike Memley at the White House. Mike, thanks so much for your reporting this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome back. We're following breaking news along the Gulf Coast. Ida now weakening after making landfall as a Category 4 storm in Louisiana. We will have the latest in just a few minutes. But there is another big story we're following this morning. Today is the last full day of U.S. evacuations from Kabul before the deadline to get out of Afghanistan.
American forces are tackling two tasks: get more people flown out of Afghanistan and to safety, and pack up the U.S. military. Early this morning, another attempted attack complicated the U.S. withdrawal. Several rockets were fired near a neighborhood close to Kabul's international airport today. A military official tells Reuters that a U.S. defense system may have intercepted all or some of those rockets. The origins of the attack are currently unknown. After the attack, the White House released a statement saying the U.S. military command will, quote, redouble their efforts to prioritize doing whatever is necessary to protect our forces on the ground. The move followed another U.S. airstrike Sunday. The Pentagon says the U.S. conducted a drone strike on a vehicle that posed an imminent threat, a potential car bomb heading to Kabul airport. According to the U.S. military, the strike killed 2 ISIS-K planners and facilitators in an eastern province of Afghanistan.
Yesterday, President Biden traveled to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where he witnessed the dignified transfer of the remains of the 13 U.S. troops killed in that suicide bombing attack at the Kabul airport last Thursday. Joining us this morning are NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley in Germany and NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga in Rome. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for being with us. Matt, I will begin with you. So evacuations are underway amid these ongoing terror threats and attacks. Can you update us on what we know about the rockets in Kabul and how the U.S. is responding?
Yeah, well, we don't actually know if the U.S. is going to be responding anymore. As you mentioned, the response was immediate. It was sort of the defensive system, kind of like an Iron Dome type of thing that shot down those rockets as they were approaching the airport. So the response was very quick. The best response at this point the U.S. can offer is to get out of Afghanistan. And after 20 years, there's now less than 24 hours for the U.S. to pick up sticks and get out. And really the challenge now, as there's only about 300 Americans in Kabul who are still trying to leave, that's according to Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, The challenge now is to get the diplomats and the soldiers out, because remember, there are thousands of troops who were put there. The embassy is now at the airport as of a couple of weeks ago. They all have to be extracted as well, along with equipment, classified documents, and other stuff. That's going to be a big effort, and that all has to happen between today and tomorrow. And then there's plans for what to do with the airport. Who's going to take control? How does that happen? How does that hand over? That's all a very, very big deal and something that has to be discussed, something that has to be planned. Right now, all of that is being done under the threat of continued attacks by ISIS-K. Now, remember that there was that drone strike yesterday that killed, supposedly, ISIS-K suicide bombers who were in the process or about to launch yet another extremely deadly suicide attack on the environs around that airport. Whether or not that actually neutralized the threat that had been an imminent threat, it's yet to be seen. Guys?
Claudio, another big issue, Afghan refugees being resettled throughout the world, including in Europe where you are. What is in store for this last full day of evacuations?
Hey, Joe. Well, most of the allied countries, apart from the U.S., have now left Afghanistan days before the deadline tomorrow. Countries like Italy, where I am now, or France or Britain, they ended their evacuation effort and pulled out all of its staff. And, of course, soldiers by Saturday. Well, now these countries, of course, have taken as many people as they could. Italy said that they took as many as more than 5,000 Afghan nationals to Italy, which is the highest number, Italy says, in the European Union. If you don't consider, of course, Britain, which is not part of the European Union anymore. But many of the Afghan nationals who have been evacuated also from the U.S. are using stations, air bases from U.S. air bases in Europe as stopovers on the way to America. For instance, this morning we heard that there are about 15,000 evacuees who were still, at least this morning, at Ramstein Airport, which is the biggest U.S. air base outside of the United States. But also here in Italy, there is an air base called Sigonella in Sicily, where there are about 3,000 Afghan evacuees that will eventually make their way to the United States. But the evacuation pretty much effort is done for now, and maybe there will be a few tens or hundreds of Afghan nationals who may make it as a last-ditch effort on one of those American military planes out of Afghanistan. But right now, the effort really, as Matt was saying, is that the effort is to bring out of Afghanistan the American staff and American soldiers by the deadline tomorrow, Joe.
And Matt, let's talk a little bit more about what's going on there at the airport. I mean, how has the terror threat grown as the deadline for U.S. withdrawal comes closer and closer?
Well, again, guys, that's a good question. Was that threat neutralized? Because as of yesterday morning, the State Department, U.S. intelligence had warned Americans not to approach the airport. And that was because of an imminent attack that was supposed to happen within the next 24 to 36 hours. The idea behind that airstrike was that they killed attackers, suicide bombers, who were en route to the airport. So if indeed all of that is true, it's unclear whether or not there's going to be any successive attacks between now and tomorrow. There's a very narrow window for ISIS-K to launch any more deadly suicide attacks. The window is simply narrowing by the fact that there's that deadline approaching. So if ISIS-K hopes to kill American soldiers or Afghans who are trying to leave Afghanistan, they don't have much time to do it. And the U.S. doesn't have much time to get out. So it's unclear whether or not that threat has been neutralized. But, the fact that there was still a security presence at the airport, that they were able to shoot these rockets out of the sky as they approached the airport, that really does show that there's still quite a bit of security capability at the airport and quite a bit of response level available to U.S. soldiers to defend themselves. Guys?
Claudio, how has the rate of refugee evacuations changed in the past few days as this operation winds down, the deadline gets closer? And then after the August 31st deadline, will they continue, and what will that look like?
Well, that is a very good question, Jill, that also Afghan nationals as well as the international community are trying to give you an answer to, because there is, at least according to the UN, another 500,000 at least Afghan nationals who want to get out of Afghanistan and who did not make it either to the airport or on one of those planes out of Afghanistan. Many, of course, we've seen in the past few days are en route to the land borders trying to get out of Afghanistan that way. But there is an important statement that was issued yesterday on this point by the the U.S. saying that the U.S. is among 97 nations across the world that have received an assurance. They struck a deal with the Taliban, who ensured that Afghan nationals who want to leave Afghanistan and who are in possession of legal travel documents, perhaps because they worked with allied nations in the last 20 years, can leave Afghanistan even after that deadline. Of course, that will be a lifeline for these people if, of course, the Taliban respect this deal, Joe.
All right, Claudio Lavanga and Matt Bradley, thank you so much for your reporting this morning.
One well-known business owner is stepping up in a big way to help people in Louisiana. Jim Mackingvale, known as Mattress Mac, has asked the people of Houston to donate supplies and is sending 30 trucks to Louisiana. His store, Gallery Furniture in North Houston, Texas, is also letting Louisiana residents who evacuated to Houston sleep for free. Mackingvale's store has sheltered hurricane victims in the past, including during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I actually remember I was there back when Hurricane Harvey hit the Houston area. He literally opened up his store for people to stay there. Just a well-known guy in the South who always really pitches in when these hurricanes hit and affect so many people.
Oh, gosh, that's one good story to hear of all of this is people helping people. Thank you, Joe. Now, Louisiana hospitals are bracing for another public health emergency this morning as Ida slams the state during a severe surge in COVID-19 cases. These are images from inside two Oxnard medical centers. You can see pieces of a roof coming off, forcing two hospitals to prepare for evacuations once conditions improve. Employees were sheltering in the hallway while putting plastic sheets on the ceiling to stop rain from getting in, and nurses inside say windows were cracking and several lights went out at the height of the storm. Luckily, though, no one was injured. Hospitals there are being pushed to the limit. Louisiana was already struggling with the spread of the Delta variant before Ida made landfall. Nearly 2,700 people are in the hospital for COVID, leaving little to no ICU beds available for additional patients. According to the state's Department of Health, every parish in the state is at the highest level of transmission risk. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel for more on this. Dr. Patel, good morning. So I know you helped with the medical disaster response for Hurricane Katrina 16 years ago to the day. What are hospitals doing to prepare for the aftermath of this hurricane? How does the COVID-19 pandemic complicate this particular preparation process?
Yeah, Savannah. So here's the good news. The area has been more battle tested and prepared than you could possibly imagine. This is something that they did prepare for, the scenario of hurricanes, Category 4, et cetera. They did not prepare for a pandemic on top of that. So what hospitals have done, you covered several of the hospitals that have already suffered physical damage, but as many of the hospitals that were kind of around the New Orleans area, knowing that New Orleans was somewhat protected, hopefully by the levees, which have held strong, they evacuated some of their most critical patients to those hospitals. Here's the challenge. Normally, they would evacuate those hospital patients to Texas and surrounding states. There's no room there. So that's one challenge. And then the second, as you point out, are people who need to go into shelters, people who went into shelters before the storm made landfall, and then those who will need to seek shelter in the next days to weeks. Keeping those shelters safe when those cots and those arrangements were so close together, challenging during COVID. They're doing requirements for symptoms, testing, monitoring. They're offering vaccines when people come in if they're not vaccinated, mandated indoor masks, and they're trying to create space between families wherever possible. But Savannah, the real world is much more complicated. We're likely to see more infections after this time period.
Yeah, Dr. Patel, that's what I want to ask you about. I mean, kind of the spread that we might see from an event like this, especially when people have been evacuated and are sheltering in close quarters, like different types of amphitheaters, arenas, things like that. Are you concerned about that spread after this?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Savannah, we've had 18 months of experience to know that what we would call congregate settings, exactly like this, kind of large indoor spaces, especially with children and other unvaccinated adults, can become its own super spreader event. The only good news, if there is good news to have, is that we know so much more about how to contain this. So masks, testing people, making sure that as soon as someone is symptomatic, isolating them. But again, you're doing this during an active tropical storm where you have power out for millions, and you also have the physical challenge. Can't just leave and walk outside and get fresh air. So this is going to be a challenge for the coming weeks. And I just hope that we'll be able to support them by getting reprieve in the surrounding areas and states.
And Dr. Patel, knowing that hospitals in the South have been at capacity for ICU beds before this storm, what if you are somebody who needs treatment due to this storm? Something happened to you, you're showing up at a hospital because you were injured, something like that during this storm. I mean, what's that going to be like with hospitals stretched as thin as they are?
Yeah, so the amazing thing is you covered, these are hospital workers who have dedicated their lives and put even their own families at risk to be able to spend time there. So they will always have an open ear and an open door, but you may not be able to immediately get treatment. So the first thing is that most people who are sheltered in place and do experience something, they usually have problems because of their power outage or sewage backup or exposure to some sort of power line that's down. So they do need to be able to seek help. You need to look for your neighbors if they need help as well. But two, also call if you don't think you have something emergent. You can use text lines. Some cell services are still up. And you can be able to communicate with a healthcare professional without physically going anywhere and going into the street.
All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, that right there is some really good information that some people might need. Thank you so much for being with us.
The U.S. Coast Guard is in place to bring emergency assistance to Louisiana, but in places like Jefferson Parish, the situation appears to be dire. More than 200 people reportedly in imminent danger in the town of Jean Lafitte after waters overtopped a levee there. Residents say the water chest high, making it impossible for rescue teams to reach them without boats. Those in the parish who don't need to be rescued are being advised to boil water until further notice. Let's bring in Jefferson Parish President Cynthia Lee Shang. She joins us now from the Emergency Operations Center there in Louisiana. Cynthia, thanks so much for taking time to join us. I want to start right there. First of all, with Lafitte, what is the latest there? We heard that the waters, that the levee didn't fail, but that the waters went over the top of the levee, putting a lot of people potentially in danger. So what's the latest with that situation?
Yeah, probably late afternoon yesterday, I was able to reach Mayor Tim Kerner Jr., and he was getting reports that the water was getting high. We were very concerned. We were talking about the possibility of people drowning back there if the water just kept rising. And then certainly we were starting to get rescue calls for people, very high waters. So that was very difficult. We were hearing people were in the attics overnight. It was no electricity. It was a very, very horrible night for them. Right now, light is just starting to come up. It's not full light. It's just darkness. It's just breaking through right now. So our teams are ready. They have been waiting to get out there to do search and rescue. The Coast Guard, the state police, all of our law enforcement officers have been looking at the roadways. They'll have to get back there with boats. So that is the position we're in probably for most of today, is search and rescue to get back there.
In that area, do you know about how many people need to be rescued?
We had probably nearly 200 calls for rescue, but of course our communication system's down. So that was the people that were able to get through. We have people who know family members are back there. They've lost communication with them. So there is a lot of concern for the people back there today. The other area further south is Grand Isle. We still have not had contact with them. I lost contact with them yesterday afternoon. So those are our two very critical, very pressing needs, is doing rescue in Grand Isle and Lafitte.
Yeah, and that's another concern. Grand Isle, describe the situation. How many people stayed behind there? I guess my understanding is the road that goes in and out of there is underwater right now, so you can't get there, and you still don't have phone contact with people. Is that right?
Yeah, Mayor Carmidel is our mayor in Grand Isle. I spoke to him, 2 evenings ago. He thought that about 40 people were on the island still. They just would not leave, including some firefighters who were there. That road gets impassable quickly. It doesn't take much of a hurricane to get that road to be impassable. But we were hearing reports that water was coming in areas that normally didn't get water so quickly. So we know this was a very terrible hurricane, very strong storm surge for the residents of Grand Isle.
All right.
And again, we made contact with them.
All right. Cynthia Lee Shang, we know these are going to be tough hours for you. We're thinking of you and your parish right now and wishing you the best. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Let's now go to Bill Cairns for the latest on Ida.
Hey there, Bill. Good morning. What can you tell us?
Yeah, we just keep finding out there's all these little bits and pieces of all these areas that are needing help and have emergencies that are ongoing right now. It doesn't help that we're hearing reports that the 911 system in Orleans and Jefferson Parish are down, in portions of St. Charles Parish. The fact in Orleans Parish to tell you if you have a 911 emergency, go to your closest fire department. I mean, that just blows your mind, right? If you have a 911 emergency, you would, if you could get there and walk or drive your car, you would, right? So, yeah, that's just horrible to think anyone that needs help can't go and get it. And then we're hearing about these flash flood emergencies that we have, a couple of them because of levee breaks. Alliance, Louisiana is one of the new ones. They said the levee has broken around Highway 23. It's a little small community along the Mississippi River. One of the reasons I flagged that one is that's where the Phillips 66 huge oil refinery is. And that is in that flash flood emergency. You never want to hear an oil refinery in a flash flood emergency, obviously because it could damage the place and because the environmental concerns with that. And then we have other areas that we've been talking about all morning long, like LaPlace. They've had up to 18 inches of rain. Hammond is under a flash flood emergency because of rainfall, too. And then we talked about the John Lafitte and the Lafitte area and that levee break, too. So we're done pretty much with the wind concerns with this storm. I don't think we're going to get additional wind damage. Very isolated. We are over 100,000 people now in Mississippi without power, too, guys. So we have 1 million in Louisiana and 100,000 in areas in Mississippi. From here on out, we'll continue to track all the problems we're going to have from the rain and the water from Ida. So the problems are just they're building and they're just continuing.
All right, Bill. Thank you so much, and I know we'll be checking in with you throughout the morning. Welcome back to Morning News Now. We're following the latest on Tropical Storm Ida, and here you can see the sun coming up, showing the sky beginning to somewhat clear over New Orleans. We'll, of course, be able to tell more of the extent of the damage as it gets brighter and gets later in the day there in Louisiana. We'll have the latest for you there in just a few minutes. And now it's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Contessa Brewer joins us this morning. Contessa, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Amazon's teaming up with payments provider Affirm to offer shoppers a buy now, pay later option that does not involve a credit card. Affirm's flexible payment system will soon be available on Amazon's website, and customers will be able to split the cost of purchases of $50 or more into monthly payments. They're told the total cost of the transaction up front, but Affirm says there are no late fees. Installment plans are popular with the retailers because they encourage customers to spend more money. SenseTime, a Chinese artificial intelligence firm, is filing for an IPO in Hong Kong. What's notable is the company's on a U.S. export blacklist, restricting its ability to get access to certain technology from the United States. That listing also comes as China increases regulation and oversight on the country's tech sector. SenseTime sells AI software, and some of its products include facial recognition and self-driving technology. And the next iPhone could be reaching for the stars. A noted tech analyst claims iPhone 13 could have the ability to make satellite calls. He says the phone will be able to connect directly to low Earth orbit satellites thanks to a custom chip. So potentially you could be on a remote camping trip without any cell service, experience an emergency, and still potentially get in touch with someone. Apple's expected to launch that new iPhone lineup in September. We don't know, though, whether that feature is limited just to pro models, but it'll be interesting to watch it.
Certainly will. All right. Thanks, Contessa.
More than 300,000 students in Chicago will return to the classroom today for the first time in 18 months. The city's public schools are fully reopening, but with the highly contagious Delta variant sweeping the nation, some parents are worried about sending their unvaccinated kids back to school.
And since the beginning of June, shortly before Chicago's mayor announced the reopening, there have been more than 2,600 new infections, 45 hospitalizations, and 2 deaths reported among children under 18. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett joins us from outside a Chicago elementary school. Maura, good morning. So, I mean, those are some scary numbers for parents. You hear those and then know your kid is going back into a classroom. What safety measures are these schools taking as they reopen? Are we going to see regular COVID testing, masking? What is it?
So masking is required across the city now when you're in indoor spaces. So that includes schools. And the city just last week did mandate that city employees, teachers are going to need to be vaccinated by October 15th. But that's obviously a month and a half away here as kids are going back to school today. And as for weekly testing, they did say, the Chicago Public Schools did say they're planning on doing testing to make sure that they can see if kids are negative, considering we know that kids are often asymptomatic. But as recently as over the weekend, parents hadn't gotten any communication about how these tests are going to be conducted or which company would be running these tests. And the school's also scaling back on daily temperature checks. They're not doing that. They're not doing a daily health screening like we saw them do when they did the hybrid model when they returned to school last spring. So now for the first time, school fully reopening. Again, this plan actually was put into place before the Delta variant became a problem here in the city of Chicago. And so there's a lot of anxieties from both teachers, students, and parents as they go back to school fully in person today.
Maura, the Delta variant doesn't seem to be slowing down. How are parents feeling about sending unvaccinated kids into the classroom, and how are the teachers there reacting?
Well, so it depends on which area of the city you and your family live in. There's a lot of qualms across the board, and it ranges geographically. But across the board, there's a lot of mistrust and doubt, honestly, between parents, the teachers union, and Chicago Public Schools in general, because they had promised to put certain precautions into place last spring, and parents and the teachers union weren't satisfied with that. So I spoke with one parent, Monica Espinoza. She's cautiously optimistic, but a little nervous about sending her kids back to school. She has 2 kids in elementary school going back to school today. Take a listen to some of our conversation.
The only piece of protection that you can send them to school is like with their face mask. That's all that you can do for them. This is my right as a parent to know if somebody contracted, COVID. I want to know because I want to have the choice to keep my son in quarantine as well.
So Monica, again, saying she wants to trust the school system, but not very sure about it. The teachers union, on the other hand, is very much not happy with Chicago Public Schools, calling their recent meeting ignorant and offensive. I have a statement that they gave out on Friday saying that CPS representatives and the teachers union didn't come to an agreement about the background checks for a possible COVID testing vendor. They said for them, this is a job, but for these are our lives, and we are the ones welcoming our students back into classrooms on Monday. CPS is not ready. And again, this just puts it adds to the 18-month bit of contention between the teachers union and Chicago Public Schools as the union trying to keep their teachers safe.
All right, Maura, thank you so much for your reporting.
Right now in Morning News Now, we are following Tropical Storm Ida as it moves out of Louisiana. People just now starting to get a look at the damage left behind. We have live reports from the Gulf Coast coming up here in just a few minutes. We have some sad news this morning. 7-time Emmy-winning actor Ed Asner has died at the age of 91.
Best known for portraying Lou Grant on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Asner carved out a remarkable career in Hollywood. NBC News correspondent Natalie Morales has more memorable moments from his long life on the screen.
When it was time to perform, Ed Asner was always ready.
How much I regret having taken this command.
A gifted actor who rose to any challenge.
What are you asking me for? That's a stupid question.
Raised in Kansas City, the youngest of 5 children, Asner became a household name on The Mary Tyler Moore Show.
You got spunk.
Well,
I hate spunk.
Playing grumpy but lovable boss Lou Grant. Asner won his first 3 Emmys on Mary Tyler Moore. The burly character proved so popular, it earned its own spin-off.
I'm not going to embarrass you by printing this. Redo it.
Asner snagged 2 more Emmys as Lou Grant.
And I want them to know who's running this precinct.
While on the big screen,
I couldn't be more serious, Jack.
Asner's reputation for diving headfirst into characters was cemented.
Been expecting you.
A 2-term president of the Screen Actors Guild who fought for his fellow artists, Asner was an outspoken activist whose film work entertained generations of moviegoers, including his turn as Santa in Elf.
I can't do anything right.
Buddy, you're more of an elf than anyone I ever met.
And as the voice of Carl Fredricksen in the animated hit Up. One of our favorites here on Today, Asner opened up to Al in 2017 about his legendary career.
He's the avuncular person we all know in life, who we cower at first and then learn that he's not such a monster.
A lot of Ed Asner and Lou Grant?
I would say I borrowed from Lou Grant.
This morning, tributes are pouring in. Mira Sorvino calling Asner Great, magnanimous, talented, and loving. Josh Gad remembering a beautiful soul and a truly brilliant actor. A versatile and gifted talent whose performances will continue to entertain generations for years to come.